button here. Click.
All right.
And we're live.
Cool.
It is Saturday, January 30th, 2021, 5:04 p.m. We are a few minutes late today because George was showing Kate and me his pineapple.
Right.
So George, let's talk about the pineapple.
The pineapple.
Yeah, let's.
Yeah, I got it
I know
today.
we said we were going to stick to the four corners of the Washington Post article, but
I got the pineapple is really important, and I realized I was going to go on with you today, and I said, well, I need a pineapple, and there was a Whole Foods and a Home Goods, and I needed to get something in the Home Goods, and then I saw a $9 metal pineapple, which will save me from having to buy pineapples that could rot on my shelf in the future.
Did you know that Ben had a pineapple that rotted on his shelf for
I can imagine. I've had that experience.
And I think
all you had to do, Ben, was shoot it with your cannon, and then you could eat it.
Hey, look, I've got the cannons in back of me here. And, we got baby cannon here with the wagon wheel desiccated
I don't know. You look like an insurrectionist there.
We've got a big cannon up here, and we've got little tiny baby cannon. Cool. So, we got cannon options. We also have the Bob Mueller puppet.
Right.
And he's wielding a battle axe. So we've got lots of bases covered. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, folks, but we are allowed, apparently, to have George Conway come talk about his 5,000-word article in the Washington Post.
5,021.
5,021?
It was 5,022, but we had to make a correction because there was a little boo-boo in there, and we had to take out a word. And it was my first correction.
Bob Ray.
Yeah. Somehow the word plea deal got in there, and we had to take out the word plea. It wasn't a plea deal. It was a non-prosecution agreement. But, you get tired of reading 5,022 words.
Although, if I recall right, Bob Ray himself later entered into a plea deal, right?
Oh, I don't know.
I think he had a little stalking issue.
Oh, maybe he did. I don't know.
If I got this wrong,
please don't libel people on the show.
You don't want to do. Rudy Giuliani libeled the Lincoln Project the other day.
I'm just asking questions here.
Oh, okay.
Members of the audience, if anybody wants to look this up and check me on this, I believe there may have been a little minor incident in New Jersey that everybody kind of forgot about when he showed up.
I do remember what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it
but
would have been when you were like 12, Katie.
Well, I've heard some of these things before.
Some
of them are seared in my memory for that reason.
Yeah, we're the old people here. You just reminded me of how old I am.
I'm young compared to you, dude.
I know. Sad.
So, George, I want to start with we're both old. I want to start with a matter that you gloss over in the piece in a sentence, not in a bad way, but to me it is the central thing here. Do you trust Merrick Garland to make these decisions appropriately? He's going to get confirmed over the next couple weeks. You've laid out this incredible prosecutorial agenda. Is he the right guy to make these decisions in your judgment?
Well, I hope so. I think the reason why I think he may be the right guy is because, he's a man of unquestioned integrity and extensive experience, not just in the Department of Justice, but on the Court of Appeals. And he's, you need that kind of figure, like a Griffin Bell kind of figure, to do this. And there just aren't that many of those left in the United States of America in 2021. And if there's anybody who comes close to it when you think about it, one would have been Mueller. The other is Judge Garland. So do I if you're asking me, do I trust him to make the decision that I would want to make? Well, no, I don't know what decision he's going to make. I hope that I've made my case. I hope by chance he has a subscription to the Washington Post and will have read it or have someone tell him about it. And, I recognize it's a very, very difficult thing because the amount of resources that are, that would be potentially devoted to this, given the extent of the allegations that we're talking about here, is significant, and the potential for political blowback one way or the other is significant. And those are issues I don't gloss over. I go through those, and my thesis is essentially, if not now, when? So
all right, so let's start with one other question that you kind of gloss over in the piece, and then
I just want to say that I'm putting a link to the piece in the chat so people can reference it. It's
right.
It's
really excellent.
But it glosses over things.
All pieces gloss over things. And I just want to say, I just shared with the audience the piece about Bob Ray being accused of stalking from 2006 in the New York Times. I believe that was eventually resolved by some kind of plea agreement. So I think
you're going to accuse me of glossing over things. I need some moral support.
You need some comfort, yeah. Well, we're very dog friendly here.
I'll bring Nina on in a little bit. You can meet Nina. Good dog.
Second question. You argue that this needs to be handled by special counsels.
Yes.
And you kind of don't make an argument for that. You just sort of say it.
Yes.
And I'm curious why that is. If you trust Merrick Garland to make decisions with integrity on these issues, why should it be done under the special counsel regs, which presume a conflict of interest on his part or some reason why the normal Justice Department process is inadequate? Why not, you do say at the end of the piece that, hey, the incredible range of allegations here is too much for one special counsel. But why shouldn't it be handled by like a criminal division task force or, because, if Merrick Garland is the right guy to make these decisions, why shouldn't it just be like the normal Justice Department?
Well, I mean, that's a closer call. I think that, there's an argument to be made, for example, and, it would have been a 7,000 word piece that the Southern District should handle, for example, the hush money case, and the Southern District could handle Ukraine because it was investigating Rudy Giuliani. And, the Southern District, that wouldn't necessarily make me unhappy, but I do think there's something to, if you can, the dog is about to knock over everything. Sorry. Oh my gosh.
It's okay.
It's okay. We're not on CNN, right?
We are definitely not.
So where was I? Oh, so that wouldn't be a terrible thing. I think it would be the next best thing, because I think the Southern District would be a great place to do it. And maybe even, maybe the District of Columbia U.S. Attorney's Office. But there's a problem is that, these are run by normal political appointees, and sometimes they have ambitions to do other things. I remember there was some U.S. attorney who became mayor of the city of New York and then went on to do some other things. It probably would be best if we could find some, mini or lesser Merrick Garlands who are less political in their careers, who were prominent assistant United States attorneys or, in U.S. attorneys' offices, and who don't have, who aren't in the political realm, but who are, everyone respects as lawyers who could manage an investigation, and to get 2 or 3 of those who would report to Garland. And, there could be other people in the Justice Department who could be in, not necessarily the direct reporting link, because the regulations would require that, that the reporting go directly to the Attorney General. But, there could be other people involved in that process. But yeah, I think, it could be, it could be done in the Justice Department without going to an outside counsel. But I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off the Justice Department to do it that way. But I can see you could have a significant debate about that. And
so that's
I'm not necessarily wedded to it, but it just strikes me as that's part of what the mechanism is there for. Even if there's not a straight out conflict, it's designed in part to depoliticize the process. And so,
that's actually a very interesting point. That one thing a outside counsel would give is sort of plausible, a reverse depoliticization to the department.
Yay!
They would be in a position to say, "Hey, we delegated this to a person of high integrity,
right.
And we are not, we have not talked to the White House, and we have not directed." George Conway,
right,
as
and
to
this
how to
person's
handle this.
right, and this person's not the U.S. attorney who's going to worry about being appointed again. He can go back to Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, his big law firm in the city, and make $1 million the way he was doing before. He doesn't need this shit, and he can, if he's asked to do something wrong, he can walk away. I mean, that's kind of the idea. But again, it really depends more than anything. Not so much. Also the regulations. There's one other point about the regulations that's important, is the report process, and that's one aspect of what. I know the Attorney General could just create a new regulation and say that the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York is hereby appointed a something or other and will write a report on this. But again, there's a whole process there. It's not perfect, but I don't know why you'd want to reinvent the wheel. I guess the question is, can you find a couple of people to do this? And another question is, do you want, my proposal that you would have 3 or 4, divided by subject, that can be subject to criticism too. I mean, one person I spoke to, a prominent prosecutor, said, he doesn't really know that that's such a great idea, because these people might be running into each other, and they would be, better have one person who can coordinate with himself or herself, as opposed to having those other. But again, the coordination function could be performed by one of the special counsels. It could be performed by the head of the criminal division, or by the Attorney General, some delegee of the person with delegated review authority from the Attorney General. There are different ways to handle that, and it's a question of, do you have good people and can they work together, and how you structure it. Again, and I'm saying this, that's why I don't go to it in depth. It wouldn't have been worth 1,000 words, because people would fall asleep. And frankly,
Lawfare would publish
it. And frankly, yes, Lawfare would publish it. But then, probably, I never worked in the Justice Department, so I probably am not the best person to go into how to structure all of this. So I took what was off the shelf to make it easy.
No, but I really loved a lot of parts of this article for a lot of different reasons, including the lead, which I just thought was a really captivating way to begin the piece, because you kind of begin with this. Maybe, I'm sure that you constructed this way, but this was kind of, as I was thinking, I got to the end of the piece, I was like, why did he start the piece like this? And the way that I conceived of it was that you wanted the audience to kind of be there with you in slowly awakening to the reality that they were in.
I mean, it's sort of part of the story, writ large, of my views of Donald Trump and the administration. But it also goes to, how he approached the office, how he approached the law. He was always one step ahead of it, I guess. And it wasn't always apparent to me, having not followed it as closely, what he was asking there for. And later, now it just seems so insidious, because we've seen so much that at least some of us, a lot of it hadn't happened in 2017, but the whole spectrum of activity that he's engaged in makes it very difficult to put an innocent construction on almost anything he says or does.
Yes. You were kind of ending with Ben's last question about kind of all of these different kind of off-the-shelf type of ideas to kind of construct a way to answer the answer to kind of solidifying, I guess I would say, what Jack Goldsmith has said, the executive is like based on norms. We're tearing up those norms. We
Right.
need to like have better rule of law. In fact, I just like control F the piece, and like you say rule of law 14 times in the piece. I think that this is definitely your takeaway of like not in a repetitive way. I mean, it's
it is. This is what it's about.
Like,
this is what it's about.
Yeah, but I wanted to point that out, that this is what the piece is about, like really selling this idea. It's even like, in fact, you say the point that I really liked in how you broke up the sections. I know this is like a silly thing, but I read for this type of thing, is like, we might as well say flat out that presidents are above the law. And then it pauses and there's a paragraph break and it goes, and for the rule of law to stand, that's too high a cost, with
Right.
little, if anything, to counterbalance it. And
Right.
above the law doesn't appear more than once, like as a phrase. But rule of law appears. So what I take away from that is a very simple calculation: is as much as you're opposed to the Trump presidency and everything else that happened with his 4 years, that you're actually, this piece is not focused on Trump, but focused on the aftermath and building something back up that's constructive and we can kind of go forward with.
Right. I mean, it's not just about him, even though he wants everything to be about him. It's about what message does it send if we just let everything go. And I get the point that Paul Rosenzweig and Goldsmith make, that there are costs to this. There are absolutely costs to digging up old stuff, looking at in the past, and there's the cost of potentially politicizing the system of justice, the cost of creating political controversy that would undermine the policy of the current administration, the cost of the spectacle of embarrassment to the country, which is, those are the things that Gerald Ford was concerned with when he pardoned Nixon. And over time, people accepted, I think more people accepted than they did in 1974, what Ford did there. But again, this is truly the extreme case. I mean, Nixon may have seemed extreme at the time, but this is it's just too much here. And there are allegations and there is evidence left open by the Mueller report and not sufficiently investigated in the case of the Ukraine matter, and then ongoing investigations in Manhattan that would could potentially lead to parallel federal criminality. If they're charged under state law, they could easily be violative of federal law too. There's just too much here. And then the pièce de résistance is what happened over the 3 months after the election.
All right, so let's break that out and talk about the specific substantive areas that constitute the body of the piece, because you, I think, very helpfully break out the major areas of potential criminal vulnerability and explain why each one poses risks to Trump as private citizen. So let's walk through them. You start
it was
with
a good use of headers. Ukraine.
Thank Ruth Marcus. She put those headers in.
Yeah,
they're really good.
Yeah.
Does she want to help me with my law review article?
Oh, she's the best editor on the planet. She's terrific, really. Seriously.
So let's start with your first one, which is actually the best known to the general public, which is the Mueller stuff.
Right, and you know what I relied on for the Mueller thing? The Mueller piece of it. You okay?
Ben, are you like choking to death?
No,
He's choking on Congress's refusal to do anything about the Mueller report.
I aspirated a very small amount of my whiskey sour.
Oh, you didn't send any down here. Okay. Well, anyway,
No,
guess what I relied on for the Mueller piece of it? It was Quinta's heat map.
Oh, the heat map was so good.
The heat map was the greatest because it's like he puts it all in one sheet, basically. And for the audience that hasn't seen the heat map, it goes through. It is basically a grid that summarizes volume 2 of the Mueller report. And what it does is there are 3 elements to obstruction, and there were probably, 10, 11, or 12 incidents. And for 4 or 5 of them, it's clear if you read the Mueller report, when they go through the various elements of an obstruction offense, that they essentially found obstruction in 4 instances, which I refer to in the article. And you can make, some people think that maybe it was 5 or 6, and some people think it was, there's some subjectivity there, but it's really clear that for at least 4 of the incidents, what they felt obstruction was provable or had been proven in the Mueller report, and those included the efforts to get the Attorney General to dismiss the special counsel, and the attempt to get the White House counsel to do that, and then Trump's attempt to get the White House counsel to lie about what Trump tried to get the White House counsel to do. In other words, obstruction about obstruction. So that's where that comes from. And it's pretty. I think if you go and you take that heat map and then you go to the selected sections of the Mueller report, you can see exactly what Quinta was talking about there. So there was obstruction there, and it's pretty clear from everything, or at least that there is sufficient evidence of obstruction that Mueller felt he couldn't say that with any confidence, I forget the double negative that he precisely used, that the president did not commit a crime, which isn't a great thing to say about the president. We cannot tell you with certainty that the president did not commit a crime. It's not something you want to hear about the president.
We would if we could.
We could.
It's actually worse than that.
It is worse.
We would do it if we could clear the president. We would. But we just our hands are tied on this one.
Right, and of course the big way their hands were tied was the fact that there are 2 DOJ memos that say that you can't charge a sitting president, and that figured prominently in the overarching in the Mueller report. That was pointed out, and then Mueller pointed that out at a press conference later, and then he testified about that when he went on the Hill. And at one point he actually said we would have prosecuted but for that, and then they walked that back a little bit.
So, all right, second big area, Ukraine. Gets him impeached.
Right.
Is it plausibly a crime? And if you're a prosecutor, this strikes me as the classic high crime and misdemeanor, less obvious that it violates the criminal law. On the other hand, you make a very plausible case for it.
Right. It clearly was a high crime and misdemeanor because he's using essentially his power over dispersed funds in order to coerce a foreign government to do something for his own political advantage that didn't serve the interests of the United States. And to my mind, the House case in the Senate was absolutely airtight. Now, here's the crime for purposes, or at least here's the scenario I describe in my article about how a local U.S. attorney's office would absolutely investigate something similar at the state level if it happened. The hypothetical is a governor of a state is running for re-election, and his principal or her principal opponent is the former mayor of the capital city or a big city in the state. And he's got these highway funds that he has control over, the governor does, and he decides to try to coerce the current mayor of the city to conduct some kind of an inquiry or investigation or make some accusation against the prior mayor, because that would create a controversy that would help him, the governor, politically. And he basically says, do us a favor, and he's holding back the highway funds. A U.S. attorney for that district, if that showed up in the state's largest newspaper, would immediately start investigating that. Politicians have been prosecuted for less. And as the House impeachment report points out, this fits the elements of, bribery and extortion. So, this is something that you could easily see being prosecuted were it some other politician using funds to coerce someone to do something and bribe someone to do something that personally benefits them.
Oh,
I just
Go
fixing
ahead,
that's why keeping the dogs in line here.
no, I
This is the first time we've had a guest just get up and leave. No,
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
kidding.
Yeah.
It's actually not not the first time.
No, not at all. So kind of moving forward, the next kind of thing that you talk about is the campaign finance laws. Do you want to kind of walk us through how you think that's going to fit into like the special counsel?
Well,
model?
that's a pretty straightforward one, and that one actually you might want to delegate to the Southern District, although I didn't say that, because they charged Michael Cohen for that. Michael Cohen went to jail. He did a bunch of other things that he was sentenced for, but he made these expenditures. Well, he made one expenditure to Stormy Daniels, and then he arranged for another expenditure to be made to Karen McDougal to pay them off to be quiet in the final days of the 2016 campaign, so that it wouldn't hurt Donald Trump's candidacy. And because, for example, Cohen did this out of his own money and then was later repaid by Trump. It was an illegal campaign contribution by him or an illegal loan by him to the candidate. At a minimum, it had to be disclosed as such. And he pled guilty to the campaign finance violations. It's actually a little bit similar to what happened with John Edwards, who was acquitted, but he was acquitted because what happened there was some big donor paid some money
That was
to
so
take
bizarre.
care of. It was so bizarre to pay some money to take care of the woman that John Edwards impregnated.
Riel
And
Hunter,
the real
right?
problem with that, Riel Hunter, oh my gosh. And the real problem
I was 14 when that happened. No, I'm just kidding. I was
my
not.
goodness. And the problem there wasn't the theory. The theory, that prosecution was upheld on the theory, but what the problem there was that the woman who made the contribution was 90-something years old and in no position to testify. And so the prosecution's case, they couldn't really prove their case, and so he was acquitted. But the theory is still valid, and the Southern District thought it's sufficiently valid that they charged Michael Cohen with it, and the judge and Michael Cohen thought it was sufficiently valid that he pled guilty, and the judge approved the guilty plea, which means that the judge concluded that what the prosecution described stated a crime. And the key element of that is that the prosecution in sentencing made clear that the evidence that they had was that Michael Cohen did what he did at the behest of a certain individual, one who happened to be a person who Cohen worked for in the private sector and then later waged a successful campaign to become president of the United States. So we know who that is.
Yeah. So, I mean, related to this, and this is kind of one of the things that I think I'm interested where you would draw the lines with your special counsel and how you would split up their duties. And we're fond of Venn diagrams here in Lieu of Fun. And so like kind of in part, like I'm kind of seeing all of these different special counsels as having, as you said, like they're going to possibly be in conflict with each other. Or that would be like like a human thing for them to deal with and kind of a political thing for them to deal with in like the reality of the situation, but also just in terms of like jurisdictionally who would have control over different issues. This is where I think it kind of gets meaty, which is like the bank, insurance, and tax fraud, because it touches everything in like so many ways. And it's both at the federal and the state level. And so can we talk a little bit about kind of and you think about kind of money fraud, and you think also campaign finance. And so that does actually end up,
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
I'm still here. I just need to get a plug or else I'm going to totally disconnect on you.
So I'm just kind of like interested in how you're seeing those split up. Like, why did that get a separate heading even? Like,
Well,
why didn't you put it all into like follow the money, basically?
well, look, I mean, it's the heading. It's all together because it's it's a mishmash of things that's now being investigated by the Manhattan DA's office, and we don't have complete visibility into what they're looking at. We only have press reports, but
Yeah.
what they're looking at is just things like exaggerating the value of properties for purposes of financial statements to banks and insurance companies, and then minimizing the value of properties for tax purposes, and
totally.
all the things like that. And there are you have the New York Times. I didn't really mention these; it got edited out of the piece. The New York Times has reported about all the tax issues that Trump has, and there's just a lot potentially there. So that's why that's all grouped together. We don't have total visibility about it, but the point is that whatever it is that could be charged at the state level, the odds are it could be a federal crime as well, because the tax returns. Yeah. Go ahead.
A weird question about kind of like disclosure, which is like, do you think in any way that there should be more public disclosure from state or local, well, state or federal authorities when they're investigating, like people, like former public officials, like the president, in this type of thing? Like, as a lawyer, as a person who like thinks that this is important, or do you think that that's a dangerous game to play?
I think it's a hard game to play, and not having, I'm not a prosecutor by trade, never been a prosecutor or really a defense lawyer. There are a lot of problems. One is grand jury secrecy. One is the fact that you don't want to tip off people sometimes as to what is being investigated, and there's also a question of fairness, of whether or not it's fair to talk about things that weren't charged. But that fairness, to be fair, that fairness is undercut by the regulations in the case of the special counsel. The special counsel rules that allow or that require a report to be written. I think that, for example, in the Mueller investigation, the public would have been better served by some more periodic reporting by the special counsel on the kinds of things that they were looking at. But again, I don't know how you would do that. It's hard. And without jeopardizing the investigation, how you do that is just really hard.
All right, so
Yeah,
I have a couple of a couple of things before we go to audience questions. Is your computer okay?
I think I can, if this cord extends far enough, and we will have power to go.
Yeah, Ben, I was just going to ask
There we
what
go.
your thoughts were too. Like,
I'm good now.
Are you? Do you think that this is unprecedented to ask for like more of a to ask for this many special counsel, to ask for it to go in this level? Like, let's give George like a second to compose everything. But
Yeah, I'm composed.
I think you have.
Sorry about
but
this.
I'm also like interested. Like, this seems like just a few weeks ago we had Jonathan Rauch on, and he was talking about pardoning, like about Biden pardoning Trump, and like the value of that. I mean, if this is the opposite, obviously, of that.
So I would say the following.
No one agree with Jonathan, by the way.
I am in sympathy with George's substantive point, which is that the former president has potential criminal exposure across a wide range of areas. I'm entirely in agreement with George about the substantive areas of possible federal prosecution. I'm agnostic about the form that the investigation would take. I think it has to be investigated, and I think I don't see how we escape that. except if Biden feels the way Jonathan Rauch does, in which case that's a matter of presidential grace that really has nothing to do with the justice system. To me, the only aspect of George's piece that I scratch my head about is the specific procedural mechanism of the special counsel and the multiple special counsels. But I gotta say, I'm not sure that that's an all that important point, because it seems to me, and George, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're kind of agnostic on that and you could see doing it a different way, and I'm certainly not opposed to it, if Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco come in and say, hey, we want some cover for this, let's get, Chuck Rosenberg to run one investigation, and let's get, Mary Jo White to run one investigation, and let's, sort of luminaries of the criminal bar. No one's like, I would never say that's wrong. Don't do that.
Well, I think
why do I raise an eyebrow at Mary Jo White? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't.
Well, Mary Jo White is a very esteemed former U.S. attorney in New York who was, known for her, seriousness and aggressiveness. But like change the names if you want. But there's some group.
There'd be some group that you would do it. And the fact of the matter is, it's going to require multiple teams, whether or not you have one person deemed the head prosecutor, right, whether it be the United States attorney for the district of whatever, or one special counsel, or a task force chairperson, or that, as you would describe, you said maybe a task force within the Justice Department. Well, somebody would have to lead the task force. So, but there would have to be separate teams working on totally different matters in parallel. Because if you don't have that number of people doing that, you're either going to have to basically say, we're just not going to look at X, Y, and Z, and we're just going to focus on one thing, maybe Mueller or Ukraine, and we're going to have to let some of the others go. Maybe you could do that with the financial stuff, because we know that the state authorities are looking at that heavily, and you could basically wait to see what they come up with, and then if you feel the need later to create a team to bring on some follow-on cases, you could do that. So again, I felt the reason why I went to the off-the-shelf special counsel mechanism is because it's there, everybody is familiar with it, and partly, I must say, by saying that we need multiple special counsels, I was just emphasizing, it was a way of emphasizing the breadth of what needs to be looked at here. It's going to have to require, again, 4 teams. And you may not want to call them special prosecutor's office or special counsel's office. I get that. But that's one way to do it. It's a mechanism that's there. And that mechanism, one good thing about the mechanism is that it requires, by regulation, the writing of reports explaining, why they did or didn't do what they did or didn't do.
All right, we got a million audience questions. Just a reminder to people, I'm skipping over a lot of these questions because they are not following within the 4 corners of the article. We are not taking questions about matters outside the 4 corners of the article. We're not taking questions about Kate's family or my family or George's family. We're not taking questions about matters that some of us may have written about in other articles. We're talking about this article today. Concerned citizen, the floor is yours.
Hi, my question is about the trial. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
4 corners broadly construed.
Nice to see you.
If you're on screen, your question was okay.
Mr. Conway, thank you for your work. In your article, you say Trump incited insurrection. There is evidence that Trump intended for his supporters to storm the Capitol, such as his withholding of security forces and refusal to intercede as the breach was taking place. Republican senators in the upcoming impeachment trial can be expected to argue that there is inadequate evidence that Trump incited the storming of the Capitol. My question is twofold. Where would you suggest investigators look to find more evidence of intent? And how would you suggest arguing proof of incitement? Thanks.
Well, there are a couple of points, a couple of responses there. One is, in terms of what to investigate, I think the circumstances by which the rally was organized and its connections to Trump and Trump's people need to be investigated to a fairly well, and especially conversations that Trump had concerning the rally and what he thought it was about and what he meant, what his state of mind was when he said it's going to be wild and things like that. And also, as the questioner points out, it's very important that we understand exactly what he did not do, what he failed to do, how he sat watching this at the White House and apparently refused to take any action, to go on television, tell people to stop, and maybe perhaps delayed some kind of a federal response to it. That has to be investigated to a fairly well, because that goes again to his intent. Did he really, like what happened? Was this something he wanted to happen because he thought, at the very least, it might prevent the certification of the election in favor of Joe Biden? And that also goes to a second potential legal theory that can be used against Trump. Normally, in a situation like this, you'd have to show intent to incite the insurrection, because that's normally the way you would do it. But in a case such as this, as one professor points out in Slate, a criminal law professor points out, it's the fact is that he had a duty. 5 minutes. Okay. That has a duty to do something to protect the people, and he fails to comply with that duty. That can essentially be a substitute for the requisite intent, and that's a very interesting legal theory, and I think it's one that could potentially pose some problems for him.
Michael Fromberger, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. So you already touched on this a little bit, I guess, to some extent. In your article, you talked a bunch about how prosecutions against the ex-president are possible, particularly at the state level. But one of the things I found myself thinking while reading this is that I think back to Ken White's take a lot, where he talks a lot about how prosecutors, and particularly federal prosecutors, are reluctant to take on prosecutions that aren't really obvious wins, right? And so I guess I'd be curious about your view on how likely you think it is that we could get meaningful prosecutions. I mean, I agree with your point that they're possible, but how are likely given that even the legislature doesn't seem to support punishing the guy?
Yeah, now, Ken is obviously a very experienced former prosecutor and criminal defense lawyer, and I think there's truth in his belief that state prosecutors are a little less risk averse than federal prosecutors. I don't know, whether that.
But before
I
you
just
go
want to
on,
quickly summarize.
Yeah, a lot of people had trouble hearing that question.
A lot
go
of
ahead.
people didn't hear the question, and I think we were all struggling. But Michael's question was basically, your article makes a good case that prosecutions against the ex-president are possible, especially at the state level. But as Ken White has repeatedly pointed out, prosecutors, especially federal prosecutors, prefer safe bets. Can you give your view on how likely you think meaningful prosecutions might be, given the prosecutorial incentives and apparent lack of political support from the legislature? And I think it's a great question.
Yeah, I don't question the general proposition that Ken asserts, which is that state prosecutors often tend to be less risk averse than federal prosecutors. I think it's not really possible to make an assessment here about the relative risk aversiveness of particular special counsels that have yet to examine the evidence and haven't been appointed. I will say that in the case of the state prosecutors that are actively involved in investigating the Trump organization and Donald Trump, they are heavily invested in their investigation by all accounts. I mean, the press reports indicated that they have interviewed extensively, interviewed witnesses from Aon, which was
you're not going to open that can if you're not going to get to the bottom of that can.
And that's right. Yeah, they've been going heavily, and the reason why reporters know about some of this stuff, like the interviews of the Aon witnesses and the interviews of the Deutsche Bank witnesses, people think, oh, the prosecutors are leaking things. That's not how these stories come about.
No,
the way these
really
stories
isn't.
come about typically is that, well, the defense lawyers every time you interview a witness or call them before the grand jury, that's another defense lawyer, and the defense lawyers are all out there talking, and they know reporters, and they talk to each other to say, hey, my guy was asked this, what was your guy asked? And as a result,
sit down.
And as a result, the I don't know where that came from. Not here.
Oh no, it's not here. That was I think that was one of our questioners. That
Oh, okay.
their mics
That's
were
okay. Okay.
Not you.
and it could have easily been me. And so where was I? I was saying that, that's how it comes out. And that means there are a lot of lawyers in New York who are familiar with various individual aspects of the investigation, which means they're heavily invested in this. There was also a Washington Post report, which I mentioned in my article, where they indicated that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, it was reported the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has hired a company called FTI Consulting, which is a very, very expensive and high-end forensic accounting expert company. They do other things as well, financial analysis and so on. And, basically to crunch the numbers that they're getting from the documents that they're seeing. And that kind of work is something that local prosecutors' offices don't normally do, and they don't normally fork out, their public prosecutors' office, they don't normally fork out the amounts that are required to hire such expertise. And that tells you they're very serious.
All right, Steve Grathwall, the floor is yours.
Okay, sorry about the upscuttle a little earlier. My cat knocked over.
Well, I want to see what the hat says more than anything else. I can't see it.
Okay, it says make tech great again.
Oh, okay.
Tech being the typesetting system.
Oh,
computer
okay.
Typesetting system.
It's a super geeky joke that way too many of us in the chat all got.
Yeah.
Wait, but
super geeky.
But wait a minute,
yeah.
we got a background question. Did you say the cat knocked over a dulcimer?
I know, I was going to say that too.
Yes. So wait, you've got a dulcimer being attacked by a cat, and George
has a ring light that was attacked by a dog.
And you also have a player piano in your background.
Yeah, I do.
That
We haven't
is
used
super,
it. Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, go for it.
It's the great cosmic convergence. It has to be. Yeah. Okay, so my question is, if Trump were to go to trial, it would clearly be a circus that would make the OJ trial look like traffic court.
True.
How can justice possibly be done in such an atmosphere?
That's a good question. I think that was one of the reasons that Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, is he thought that a trial would be a degrading spectacle, a circus. And Donald Trump turns everything that he is involved with into a circus. That's going to require a very strong hand by a district judge. And one of the good things about federal court is it's less likely to have cameras at the district court level. I don't think they have them in the District of Columbia, and that would help, I think, a lot. Even though I generally favor openness in the courts, I think there's something to be said here not to allow the defendants to turn this into a televisual circus.
Yeah.
I just want to say the other factor that really negatively affected the OJ trial was just the quality of the judge. And
I was literally going to say that. And then I was like, no, it's too petty and in the weeds. I don't go into it.
He didn't control
awful.
the lawyers. He didn't. Yeah,
Do you remember his hourglass
he was
collection?
terrible.
He was out of his league.
Hourglass collection?
And to be fair to him, I mean, it's not like something you become a trial judge in L.A. expecting to have to deal with. But it's like
yes, you do. Yes, you do. Do you know who lives in LA? Like, that's exactly what you expect.
The quality of the district bench in federal court in Washington and New York is extremely high.
Right.
And the likelihood that you would get assigned a judge who was orders of magnitude better prepared than Lance Ito is pretty high.
And remember, one of the things about the OJ case, there was a civil trial afterwards going over the same evidence, again with a lower burden of proof, and that was not a circus.
Right.
And that was not a circus.
No, because it was controlled.
Controlled,
yeah.
Right.
So, E.G. Phillips, you have my favorite question of the day, take it away, sir, because this is the question. If I'd been in the audience, I would have wanted to ask George.
Am I going to have to duck now?
No. You're gonna love this question.
Come here, dogs.
I was going to get my dog for you again, George. So there'll be a happy ending to this no matter what.
So, if under some bizarre set of circumstances you were Trump's lawyer, which of the potential avenues of prosecution would worry you most?
Oh.
So let me just repeat that for those who couldn't hear. If by some ridiculous turn of events you were Trump's lawyer, which of the numerous avenues of potential prosecution would you be most worried about?
The financial stuff.
Totally.
Because
I completely agree with that.
Because they don't have to prove everything that Trump did in the books was bad. All they need to do is find one thing. And if you if he's a guy who tends to cheat and lie and make people do bad things to promote his wealth or the perception of wealth, and he does that consistently over a long period of time, the odds of prosecutors finding that one thing or two things that are easy to explain to a jury gets higher and higher. And
it's so true.
That's, with Leona Helmsley, no doubt she did a lot of things. I mean, a lot of these real estate types, that are private companies, who knows what goes on with these private companies. But the only thing that brought Leona Helmsley down on a tax charge was she was sending invoices for the renovation of her palatial estate in Greenwich, I think it was, Greenwich, Connecticut, and billing them to one of her companies. And then she stiffed one of the contractors. And the contractors leaked a pile of the invoices to the New York Post. And here, that's an easy thing to understand. You don't have to understand anything about home decoration in mansions. You don't have to understand very much about the tax laws to know that if you're basically siphoning money out of a company and not paying taxes on it because you're treating it as a business expense when it actually is so that you can have a magnificent swimming pool, that's really easy to explain to jurors. And the odds, if he's done something, if he's consistently done things that are bad in the way he mingles his personal and professional businesses, and they have tax issues and so on and so forth, the odds that prosecutors could find that one or two or three things that they can explain to 12 members of randomly selected from the borough of Manhattan, a jury, that goes up. That's the thing I would be terrified the most about.
I also, one other point in support of George's formulation, the volume of information is just vaster.
Yeah.
Right? So you have, something with respect to like the Ukraine stuff, the total volume of information is not that high. There aren't that many statements. There aren't that many witnesses, although there are a bunch. the volume of communications is large, but it's limited.
Yeah.
You look at a business over time, and the total volume of information, financial information included, is just huge. And a corrupt business presents so many opportunities for that corruption to be visible.
And
Ray
you just have to find one thing.
Ray Bond,
Yeah,
you
that's
get
totally true.
the last question of the evening.
All right. So, as you've laid out, Trump's potential crimes are very wide-ranging. But one thing that really ties all of them together is that almost all of them involve proving a criminal intent on behalf of Trump. And you and others have made a pretty compelling argument that he was not fit for office due to mental illness and personality disorders. So how do you go about proving the intent of a person who seems so untethered from objective reality?
Yeah, that's actually one of his best defenses to some of the potential charges.
I agree with this.
And
I completely agree with this.
I mean, that was actually
that he's normalized insanity.
Right. I mean,
I'm
this
not
is
capable
a guy,
of forming criminal intent.
Well, but he's capable of. But he actually believed that there was some legitimate investigatory matter that Ukraine could conduct that was in the interests of the United States. I mean, one of the problems with proving criminal intent with Trump is that you go into the magical mystery tour of what he believes in his own mind. And the truth of the matter is, with Trump, I think there's just a mishmash of falsehoods and fantasies and delusions and misconceptions and misinformation mixed in with a few facts here and there that's all twisted, and I don't even know if he knows his own mind whether he has any conception of which are which. And that's why, that's why some of the the financial crimes may be easier to prove, although in that case, he's probably going to rely on the fact that, well, these accountants went over this information, and that's why it would be probably important in the case of the financial matters for the prosecutors to flip somebody in the Trump organization who can explain what he was directed to do at the behest of Donald Trump. It's also why some of the insider testimony, for example, with respect to the election fraud allegations might be important. He apparently did admit privately that he understood he had lost. He was bemoaning to people that, how could I have lost to this schmuck, essentially? And he was saying that in the White House from time to time. And that actually would be powerful if somebody were to testify to that. That would actually be powerful evidence, for example, in a potential prosecution under, say, Georgia law, or with respect to what he had done but with Raffensperger and the Georgia state investigator, even if it's under federal law, that he actually understood that what he was trying to do was not to write some kind of fraud, but to actually perpetrate one. So again, I mean, it's very, very tricky. It's a very good point that the questioner makes about Trump, that it's his state of mind is a bit of a jumble at times. And actually, if you go through the Mueller report, they actually kind of refer to difficult issues regarding state of mind. And I think impliedly that's what they were talking about.
So we have to wrap up. I am so happy that you came on, and I'm so happy
to be here, and I'm sorry about my glitches with my camera and my dogs and so on.
No, I'm in the middle of moving, and what you don't see is off camera is everything is in boxes, and this is everyone's life. Everyone's life is just what you can see in one tiny sliver, and then there's a million things happening on in the background. So
this was fun.
Yes, and so we're so glad to have you. I have one last question, which is just kind of I loved your Preet story so much, and it kind of as I said at the beginning, but you have this kind of very public anti-love affair with the president, and I'm just kind of very curious, that seemed like it was one moment for you, but what was the real moment of as you kind of walked through all of this,
there were a bunch of moments.
I mean, I'm sure it was more than
there were a bunch of moments. I mean, there was a moment where, for example, when he fired Comey, not that I was a big fan of Comey, but the way he fired Comey and what he said about it struck me as completely insane. And
I don't know. Was it like a spidey sense feeling? Like
it was a sense that there was something. Like this is off. Yeah, no, it was a feeling from the very beginning that, I mean, look, lots of administrations have had their difficult shakedown cruises. I think the Carter administration had it, the Clinton administration had it, to some lesser or greater extent. When you have less experienced people in the government, all of a sudden running the government in the United States, there are going to be glitches. And at first I was thinking, well, this is the shakedown cruise. But the more and more we got into it, it was really about him and about his behavior and the oddness of his behavior. And I think one of the first instances was the way he handled Comey and the firing of Comey, and then telling people that it was about Russia. I mean, there was just something.
Was it like a belief that like the persona that was on Twitter was a persona and it wasn't the reality?
The belief that I had going in, and I've said this a lot, is, look, he was not my first choice. He was way at the bottom, for who to run for president. But I honestly believe that you become president, you should realize there's something greater than yourself, and you want to leave a legacy, and you want to surround yourself with good people, and sooner or later you'll rise to the occasion to some extent. And I thought with Trump, there are always going to be these moments where you just say, oh God, why did he do that? Why did he say that? But I hope that it would be just, okay, that we'll have some of those moments, but we can maybe hope to achieve some level of normalcy as he kind of gets the hang of it. And the problem was it never happened. And why? And it got me to asking, well, why does it never happen with him? Why does he actually seem to get worse? And that led me to go back and to read things that I had never read before, which was what the mental health experts had said about Trump going back to 2015 and 2016. And in particular, there was an article that I read in Rolling Stone magazine, of all places, written by this terrific writer named Alex Morris, who asked the question.
Alex. He's great.
She wrote this.
She's like amazing.
She wrote this terrific piece, and it was, does Donald Trump have narcissistic personality disorder?
I remember reading that.
And I read that, and I'm like, she goes through the elements like I later did for like kind of a more expanded version of it, and then to discuss the constitutional aspects of Trump's inability to carry out the duties of his office. But she went through the 9 diagnostic criteria, and that led me on sort of a intellectual journey where I actually went out and I bought a copy of the DSM-5, and I read some other things, and I realized this guy can't function in any way that we would expect somebody who is acting on behalf of others as a fiduciary. And the presidency is basically, as you point out in your book, Ben, it is the ultimate fiduciary responsibility in this nation. And he's capable of thinking about and caring about nothing but himself. And that's, that sort of, I learned that over time, both by sort of investigating that and reading about that, and just by watching him and saying, what the is his problem? And that was his problem.
Yeah. We're going to leave it there. George Conway, you're a great American. Thank you so much for joining us. Kate, who do we have for tomorrow? We're not doing a mystery guest tomorrow, right?
Yeah, we're not. We have Nate Persley of Stanford Law School. He's gonna come on, and he and I are going to debate the Facebook Oversight Board decisions that came out this week in the wake of in prelude to the decision that they'll be making about Trump's ban from Facebook. So that will be fascinating, and that will be, oh God, Ben, help me out.
23 hours.
22 hours. God damn it.
22 hours.
22
and 53
hours.
minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore. But we do, at least some of us, have narcissistic personality disorder. And, the rest of the world just has to adjust. The criminal law is part of the answer.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get that disorder.
We will see you tomorrow, folks. George, great to see you.
Thank you.